Good morning and welcome to the Sunday morning sermon for May the 4th of 2025. We've been working our way through the book of First Corinthians very slowly, and we're in the third message in this series on what's a church to do. And we're talking this morning on undiscovered power. Number 3 in this series, First Corinthians chapter 1, verses 18 through 25. You know, we live in a unique time in history. As far as knowledge is concerned, there has never been a time in history where there has been so much knowledge available as today. At one time in history, all the available knowledge about everything was relatively small, and a highly educated person was able to master a great deal of the available knowledge. That's no longer true. The amount of information available has increased so dramatically through the years and continues to multiply in ever-increasing ways every day. An educated person today needs to specialize in a small area of knowledge, because knowledge is so vast today that a person needs to be committed to learn a lot about very little. That brings us to an interesting question. What exactly is an educated person today? You know, just in my lifetime, I remember when it was possible for someone to succeed without having a high school diploma. Then a high school diploma became a requirement for even the most menial tasks. It wasn't long before you needed a little bit of college was required for a lot of jobs. And then a college degree was required for many of the better paying jobs. Today, advanced degrees are not unusual for employers to expect, and many professions require them. But are we more educated? John Jones may decide to get a PhD in microbiology. He does his research and he writes his doctoral dissertation on the function of a particular amino acid. Now, admittedly, he knows a lot about amino acid, and he's considered a highly educated man. He has a doctorate. He's now Dr. Jones. But does Dr. Jones have something important to say about poverty? Does he have something important to say about the war in the Middle East? Probably not. At one point in our history, a highly educated person probably would have something important to say on a wide range of important topics. Now he can no longer master the volume of information outside of his own narrow field of studies. So being highly educated no longer means what it once did. Many of our so-called educated in our culture are increasingly antagonistic toward biblical Christianity. For those of us who claim there is an absolute truth and there is morality, we're looked at as if we're the uneducated ones. The so-called sophisticated like to think that we're backward. We're ignorant because we believe in a creator God before whom every person will stand and give an account. And true Christianity is especially singled out because of the implications of the message of the cross. Verse 18 of 1 Corinthians chapter 1 says, "For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing. But to us who are being saved, it is the power of God." Rather than believe the message of the cross, those who reject Christianity prefer to believe the message of the world. And that is their message. The message of the sophisticated of our age. We'll look at both messages just very quickly this morning. First of all, there's the message of the world. The world has a message. It's the dominant philosophy of our culture, and it's been around for years. The message is of those who are perishing. those who have rejected God. It's the message of humankind apart from God. The message of the world is a subtle message, and many Christians tend to buy into it, or at least in part. The real question we ask ourselves is this: have we bought into this message? We need to be very careful. This message is one that it sounds reasonable at many points, but it is not the message that has the power to save. It is the wisdom of the world, not the wisdom of God. It's the message about which God says in verse 19, "For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise. The intelligence of the intelligent I will frustrate." You see, the basic feature of this message can be summed up very simply. Its main characteristic is self-sufficiency. The message of the world sees us as being self-sufficient beings. We have no need of God. After all, the world says we have all evolved. We're not a product of a creative God. Rather, we're the product of evolution. And we are continually evolving in every sense of the word. We are evolving biologically, culturally, morally. Our ability to think and reason will prove to be sufficient to eventually solve all of our problems. That's the message of the world. Is it true? Obviously, God doesn't think so. In verse 20 of 1 Corinthians chapter 1, it says, "Where is the wise man? Where is the scholar? Where is the philosopher of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world?" Just where has all the wisdom of the so-called wise brought us? What has it brought us to? How well have we done in solving the world's problems? Well, let's look at a few. What about poverty? Have we eradicated poverty from the face of the earth? How about from our own country? You mean we still have poverty after all these years of social evolution? We sure do. Let's take another. Disease. Has all our research and expertise in the fields of science and medicine, has it gotten rid of disease in our world? Have we found a cure for cancer? How about the common cold? Not yet. What about suffering? Surely we found a cure for suffering. Surely compassion has evolved to the place where we have eradicated suffering from this planet. You mean to tell me people still suffer emotionally and physically? With all that we understand in the areas of psychotherapy, they still suffer? What about hatred? Have we not been able to reach into people's hearts and minds and convince them that hatred is destructive? Do people still have this hurtful emotion? Hatred? Have we not been able to eradicate racism and prejudice? Why not? Well, what about war? Surely such an obviously destructive, inhumane behavior has been seen as counterproductive to our civilized society, hasn't it? Surely war has been relegated to the pages of history books and is nowhere to be found on this planet. No, we still have wars. How can that be? The unfortunate reality for all our so-called sophistication, we've not been able to solve the basic problems of society. Problems that have been around since the beginning of time. Certainly, we've been able to see great advances in technology. We have all kinds of new gadgets, but the really important issues of life, we don't even have temporary solutions to those. Where are the whys? Where have they brought us? What have they really done about the important things of life? The message of the world is that we are special. We don't need God because there's a little bit of the divine in all of us. That's a popular concept. Just turn on your television sometime and see someone preaching the gospel of self-sufficiency. Just look inside and focus at the inner you. Meditate on the inner energy. Look deep inside of you and you'll find the divinity that sets you apart. But have they really found God? No. No. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 21 says, "For since the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not know him. God was pleased through the foolishness of what was preached to save those who believe." They've not found the true God, only a God of their own making. In fact, they don't want to find the true God. Rather, they only want a God who approves of what they're doing. In effect, they want the roles to be reversed. They want to be the creator, and they want God to be the creation. They've created a God who fits with their idea of self-sufficiency and relative morality. They're willing to believe in that kind of God, but not the God of the Bible. Jews demand a miraculous sign, and Greeks look for wisdom. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 22 says, "Show me a sign. Give me a God who makes sense, who fits my notion of wisdom." Those two demands are still very evident in our society today. There are still those who demand that God perform for them. There are still those who demand that God conform to our logic and our reason, but history has shown that they would not believe even then, if that were to happen. You see, when we set ourselves up as being God ourselves, we don't want any rivals. We reject the true God because we're unwilling to give up our idea of self-sufficiency. We refuse to acknowledge our need, our dependency upon God. That's the message of the world. Then there's the message of the cross. You see, those who reject Christ intuitively know that the message of the cross has radical implications for their lives. And just what is this message that disturbs them? Simply put, it is that God was made man, and Jesus died in our place on Calvary's cross to pay the penalty for our sin, a penalty that we were unable to pay ourselves. The implications of this are immense. The first is that we're all sinful. That is the rub for so many people. The philosophy of the world is that we're self-sufficient. We may make some mistakes, but we're not inherently sinful. We're good to the core. To admit that we are sinful is too much for some people. But that's the implication of the cross. Jesus had to die because we are sinful. In dying on the cross, he paid the penalty for our sins. Another clear implication is that we cannot save ourselves. Not only are we sinful, but we can't do anything about it. Trying to reform our behavior just doesn't deal with the nature of our soul. So God had to step in and do something for us. This doesn't sit well with people who feel self-sufficient. The cross, however, is a renunciation of our self-sufficiency. And this is precisely the reason why it's so offensive to some and it's foolishness to others. Verse 23 of 1 Corinthians chapter 1 says, "But we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles." The world rejects the idea that we need a Savior. They do not want to admit their own sin and their own dependency upon God. The message of the cross is that we must humble ourselves. The message of the cross is that we must surrender to God. It's not a message that's easily heard by the proud. Those who consider themselves to be self-sufficient will reject this message. But for those who receive the message, this foolishness becomes the very power of God. The cross of Christ becomes their salvation as they humble themselves and receive what Christ did to pay for their sins. What seems foolish to the world is, in fact, the very wisdom of God. 1 Corinthians 1 verse 24 says, "But to those whom God has called, both Jews and Greeks, God is the power, or Christ is the power of God and the wisdom of God." The world simply doesn't understand the message of the cross. Those of us who have grown up in the church and we're accustomed to seeing the images of the cross, sometimes we also fail to see the radical nature of what the cross represents. You see, the cross is an instrument of death. When Jesus died on the cross was a common instrument of execution. To get a better idea of its meaning, suppose you were to meet someone who had a golden electric chair on a chain around their neck. Or perhaps someone who had a little golden hangman's noose or a guillotine as a piece of jewelry that they wore. Suppose you were to see on the steeple of the church one of those objects of execution. Doesn't it seem strange to have a symbol of your faith be something so morbid as a symbol of execution? It does seem both offensive and foolish, unless you understand the principle involved. You see, the cross upon which Jesus died not only was a place where he bore the sins of humanity and paid the penalty for those sins, it's also a principle for living our lives by his power. And the reason it looks foolish is because it's paradoxical in nature. It's a paradox. It's something that seems contradictory. It's like saying that the way up is down. In fact, that's precisely what it says. It says that God became weak in order to save us. It says that when we surrender our lives, we truly find them. Jesus said in Matthew 16:25, "For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me will find it." The way of true exaltation is humility. The way up is down. The way to new life is through death. The world looks at this and says, well, that sounds foolish. But when we believe it and stake our very lives upon it, we tap into this undiscovered power and find that it's real power. It is the very power of God concealed from the so-called wise and sophisticated and revealed to those who become as a child and in simple faith and trust believe upon him. And we must employ this principle daily if we are to live by the power of God. Jesus also said in Luke chapter 9, verse 23, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. Just as the cross was an instrument of death for Christ, it's also a principle of death for us. It is by daily dying to self, or to put another way, daily surrendering ourselves to Him, that we put ourselves in a position to receive His life and His power each day. We need to empty ourselves so that He can fill us with Himself. That's how we lose our lives in order to find them. In the cross, we have the power of God displayed. God was powerful enough to become weak. And it will take the power of God in our lives to humble ourselves in complete surrender to Him. The good news is that God has given us His power. As we surrender to Him, we experience God's power to live and to love and to serve and to really matter. Never mind that it seems like foolishness to the world. They will not have the last say in this matter. Verse 25 of 1 Corinthians chapter 1 says, for the foolishness of God is wiser than man's wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than man's strength. In the cross, we see the love of Christ displayed in a way that defies explanation. God loved us so much that He stepped in and did what we cannot do. He loved us so much that He gave His only Son to die for us. The truth is that we are sinners and we cannot save ourselves. The good news is that God would not sit idly by and just watch this happen and do nothing. He has provided a way. It's the way of the cross. Not everyone will travel that way. Many have and will reject it. But for those who receive it, they will experience its power. God bless. Have a wonderful day, and until we meet again, let's continue to exchange prayers daily.